Welcome, fellow citizens of YouTube. I am Based, and today I'm gonna show you why Bakhmut is such a fortress and why the Russians haven't captured it yet, even though they've been trying for the last 7 months. And they've been on the doorstep of Bakhmut for the last 4 months. And they still only managed to capture a little bit of the north side and the east side. And I'm gonna show you why. So, the first reason is heights. Bakhmut is surrounded by tons of high ground. Look, to capture this position here, which they need to cut off this road to make the Ukrainians retreat from Bakhmut, they had to capture 1, 2, 3, 4 high ground position, entrenched high ground positions, which is very hard, obviously. Because somebody that shoots from the top has an easier angle to shoot at you than you shooting at him at the top. Everybody who's ever played video games knows what I mean. So, let's get to the second reason. The more important reason. Rivers and buildings. You see, Bakhmut is completely surrounded by rivers. You have a big river in the east, and the Russians are coming from the east, so that's bad for them. You have rivers surrounding Bakhmut from the north. You have rivers surrounding them from the west. And you have even rivers surrounding them, smaller rivers surrounding them from the south. There's one part where you don't have a river. This is this part where the Russians are pushing into Bakhmut. But even if you push through here, you're gonna have to contend with these big high-rise buildings. You see those brown schlongs on this map? They symbolize high-rise buildings. And as you see, there's tons of them in Bakhmut. There's tons of them in the east, where the Russians are coming from, and tons of them in the south. And here, I've prepared a look at those high-rise buildings from Google Maps. As you can see, this is the east side of Bakhmut that the Russians have already captured. As you can see, it's full of little village buildings that you can destroy with artillery within like 1, 2, or 3 shots. There's tons of videos of buildings like this getting destroyed with 1 shot. And that's how the Russians actually proceed with their attacks. They destroy every building in a city or in a village, so the Ukrainians don't have cover hiding in those, and then the Russians have a way easier time moving in and pushing out the Ukrainians. And that's where they've been successful here in the eastern side, where everything is very destructible by artillery. But here, in the western side of Bakhmut, that the Ukrainians still hold, the buildings are completely different. You can't even destroy buildings like that with 10 shots of artillery. Usually you can't really destroy them at all, unless you shell them with either like dozens of shots of artillery or with a tactical ballistic missile. But if you look how many buildings like that are here, the Russians don't have enough tactical ballistic missiles to waste them all on a city like Bakhmut that's full of those buildings. It's also got big industrial areas here. Bakhmut isn't just full of those buildings, it's also full of football fields. As you can see, here's a football field, here's a football field, here's a football field, here's a basketball field, 2 of them, here's a football field, and here's a big football field. Like, what's going on, guys? I live in the most football-loving country in the world, and I live in a city exactly the same size as Bakhmut, and we only have 1 football field like that. But yeah, the west side of Bakhmut, which is here, what I'm showing you, is exactly here. Here's the big football field below us. Is full of those buildings, but it's also behind a big or decently sized river. Here's the river, you can see it. And here's this cool wooden church. You can see it here. And to get over this river, I mean, theoretically, the Russians could send over a force of Spetsnaz with night vision at night, and they get a foothold in this area, and let's say they capture this whole area. Sure, they can do that, but to get the supplies over, you still have to build a field bridge. And building a field bridge means building a choke point, which the Ukrainians can easily shell with their artillery, and destroying the field bridge or destroying any supplies that are trying to get over the field bridge. So yeah, theoretically you could get soldiers over here to capture the west side of Bakhmut, but you can't supply them. So in reality, you actually can't really storm the west side of Bakhmut because of the field bridge problem. That's the same problem they have in Volodar. And those rivers are surrounding Bakhmut. And the only place where rivers are not surrounding Bakhmut is this area here. But if you look at this area, first of all, this area is full of high-rise buildings too. And even this area where the Russians are trying to push in right now, which is probably the most important place of the battle right now, it looks like this. First of all, it looks extremely ugly. And second of all, those are very big, very stable buildings. Even more bigger and stable than most other buildings in Bakhmut. So the Russians are gonna have fun trying to capture that. Because they can't really destroy it with artillery from the distance, and storming such buildings usually causes casualties for the attacker that are fairly big. And that's why the Russians are forced to go around Bakhmut, which is exactly what they're doing right now. But they still, to go around Bakhmut, had to cross those 4 heights. So, as you can see, crossing the rivers and supplying the troops on the other side is almost impossible. Destroying those wonderful buildings with artillery is almost impossible. And this beautiful church with the golden, foreskin at the tower is very beautiful. And it's very wooden, just saying. And that's why the Russians are trying to surround Bakhmut. Because they just can't go in. And that's what we're seeing right now. But surrounding a city takes a pretty long time, especially in the Russo-Ukrainian war. And that's why Bakhmut is a fortress.